That morning began like any other, except for a small detail big enough to change the whole trajectory of my life. I stood in the 12th floor office of Whitford Biologics, where glass walls threw early sunlight across rows of shining desks. The orange notebook lay neat beside me, its edges worn from 100 openings and closings, still smelling faintly of ethanol and stamped with the fingerprint stains of night shifts. I used it to log every experiment, every mishap, every heartbeat when the system hummed right or went out of step. It was a memory, and it was proof of a dedication nobody could deny. Ellis Whitford, CEO and founder, handed me the amended contract and said, "Best investment we ever made. Laya." His voice was that familiar rasp, his gray eyes like steel lighting with the confidence I had followed for 8 years. I smiled and shook his hand. In that moment, I thought I had reached a steady rung, a place where devotion was rewarded, where I could finally breathe and believe my work had not been wasted. A few hours later, I learned how quickly that belief could be broken. Jonah, my partner, insisted we go out to lunch to celebrate. He picked a small rooftop bar in downtown Durham with a view of old red brick buildings threaded between new tech towers. Mid-June, the breeze carried magnolia and the smell of toast from the cafe below. I sat across from Jonah, my hand still slightly trembling from the excitement that would not let go. He poured bourbon for himself and ordered a gin and tonic for me. Finally, Jonah said, raising his glass with a grin, "Toy you, my love, to your raise." I laughed with him. The laugh dissolved into the rooftop wind. I took a sip. The gin's sharp chill slid down my throat, leaving a cool, sweet aftertaste. I relaxed, believing that at least once my effort had been recognized at the right time and place. My phone in my bag vibrated. The gin glass rocked, the surface of the drink catching the light. I pulled out the phone and the screen lit with ASLAC notification. I expected a small message from the project team, but it was not that. The screen showed a short, neat line as cutting as a blade. "You are done. Consider it my gift." The sender was Cole Whitford, Ellis's son, newly appointed VP of Operations. The space around me froze. The jazz music from the bar turned distant and distorted. I read the message again and again. There was no mistake. I, who had just been called the best investment this morning and had signed a raise, was stripped away by a single empty line. A taunt. My chest tightened, my senses dulled, except for Jonah's hand on mine. He glanced at the phone, no question in his eyes, only calm. He leaned in and whispered, "Check your messages later. Today belongs to you." A whispered comfort and a reminder that not everything deserves an immediate reaction. I wanted to cry, to toss the phone off the roof, to shout at all of Durham. Instead, I did nothing. I sat still, gripped the glass, tried another sip, though my mouth had turned bitter. Cole Whitford, 33, the only son of Ellis. His eyes always held a dare, his smile a sneer. He did not know validation, had never stayed up all night tracing logs, had never been the one to find a ruptured steel tube that ruined $1 million batch. But he had one thing, the Whitford name. Now he used that power to send me a Slack message and call it a gift. I finished lunch in silence. The food had lost its flavor. The rooftop air grew heavy as if I were buried in the gray upholstered chair. Jonah said nothing more. He gave me space as if he knew words of comfort would feel hollow. There is a kind of silence that drives you mad, and a kind that helps you keep what is left of yourself. I could not tell which I was in. I only knew that every time I looked at the phone, I felt my life erased from the company map. If you are listening, tell me where you're. Leave a comment with your city. I want to map this to see it stretch from the hills of Oregon, the beaches of Florida, to the quiet corners of towns where people were also cut loose from places they thought they belonged. Because in that moment, I no longer felt like I belonged anywhere. I set the phone face down on the table and forced a few more bites as if I could hold something of the day together. The gin grew warm, the ice melted and left a wet ring on the wood. Jonah stayed beside me, squeezing my hand now and then, reminding me that at least I had not lost everything. I did not know then that a few hours later, as the sun slid west and building shadows lengthened across the street, the phone would buzz again. This time it would not be an arrogant message from Cole. This time it would be the shaky voice of Ellis himself, a sound I had never heard from him before. If you have ever been knocked down at the exact moment you thought you were being lifted, tell me where you are watching from. I want to hear where that echo of a sigh lives on the map. Some memories never grow old with time, especially the long nights in the silent corridors of the clean room, where only the hum of fans and pale green fluorescent lights kept me company. I had lived through hundreds of those nights, bent over machines when the clock had already struck 3 in the morning. One night, the log printer froze. The screen flickered nonstop, and the paper jammed like an animal caught in a trap. Instead of giving up, I took my orange notebook and wrote every temperature, every pressure point, every minute by hand. My script slanted hard to the right, trembling from fatigue, but steady all the same. The next morning, when Ellis walked past the engineering wing, he saw those pages crammed with notes. He laid his hand on my shoulder and said in his steady voice, "Best investment we ever made, Laya." Those words carved themselves into me, a reason to keep going when I thought I had nothing left. I had never demanded praise. For me, work was duty, not spotlight. But to be recognized by Ellis made me believe I was in the right place, that my meticulousness was the foundation of the safety this company promised to hospitals and patients. Then Cole arrived. When Ellis started talking about selling off shares and stepping back part-time, Cole, his only son, was pulled in from a minor division and dropped straight into the vice president of operations chair. I still remember that first meeting with him as my superior. Cole walked into the room, white shirt crisp, navy tie, not even straightened yet. He sat at the head of the table with the ease of someone who thought the seat had been born for him. "From now on, we're streamlining," he said without opening a single slide. "Too many unnecessary processes. Too much detail is slowing us down." I sat at the far end, pencil in hand, the lead breaking without me noticing. In that moment, I knew change was coming and it would not be good. The first thing Hakut was the training program I had built over 2 years. Sessions to help colleagues understand validation, to learn how to read and log properly, and to make sure no one person, not even me, holds all the knowledge. I sent out the training schedule for the next week, printed the materials. But Monday morning, Cole walked in, grabbed the list of attendees, and ripped it in half. "Unnecessary expense," he waved it off with a sneer. "We don't need her level of detail." The room fell silent. Young colleagues glanced at me, confused. One whispered, "But who will teach us?" Cole shrugged. "You'll figure it out. It's not rocket science." I stood still, my orange notebook suddenly heavy in my hand. I said nothing. I only wrote a single line on the last page. Training canceled by Cole, April 12th, justification, unnecessary expense. I had learned to let the facts speak for me. Soon after, I noticed my name had been erased from the latest SOP. The old version clearly said, "Reviewed and approved by Laya Moreno." The update only read approved by operations. I asked a mid-manager. He flushed, eyes down. "Cole wants to unify names for simplicity." I gave a thin smile. Simplicity. A clean eraser of my work. Again and again in meetings when I presented deviation reports or recommendations, Cole dismissed them all with a flick of his hand. "We don't need her level of detail." The phrase repeated until it became his slogan. Every time I heard it, I felt myself pushed further to the margins, as if precision and care, the very things Ellis had once praised, were now nothing but obstacles. One afternoon, I inspected piping with the tech team. Valve number 17 leaked, droplets falling onto stainless steel. I marked it, logged it, and drafted air placement plan. Cole, leading a tour, glanced over and said flatly, "Seal with tape." The team froze. I opened my mouth to protest, but his look cut me short. I pressed my lips together, opened my orange notebook, and wrote, "Valve number 17 leak." Suggested fix bi-coal tape. It felt like spotting a hole in a ship carrying thousands of lives, only to be told by the captain to patch it with tape. I could not shout. All I could do was write, letting the evidence sit quietly in my notebook. Since Cole's promotion, I had become a shadow in the place I once belonged. Every morning, I still swiped my badge at the clean room door, the dry beep ringing out. But instead of feeling part of the machine, I felt like an intruder. Old colleagues avoided me, not out of hate, but fear. I understood. In this company, standing against Cole was career suicide. One night, I walked the empty corridor, the flat white light stretching like a tunnel without an end. My footsteps echoed heavily. I stopped at the freezer room, heard the steady beeps, and remembered Ellis's words long ago. Best investment. Now they sounded like a relic too far away to shield me from deliberate erasure. The wounds did not explode into tears or screams. They seeped in slowly like the chill of the clean room, leaving me shivering always. I did not know when Cole would strike again, but I knew one thing. He did not just want me out of the way. He wanted to erase every trace that I had ever existed in this system. And I let him, at least on the surface, because I knew the words I wrote in my notebook, the things I stored in memory, would last longer than any signature on an SOP. That afternoon, when Jonah and I left the rooftop bar, Durham's sun tipped west and poured long golden streaks down the street. I sat in the car, my hand still shaking as it touched my phone. The screen showed a string of missed calls, a familiar number. Ellis Whitford, the man who had shaken my hand that morning and called me the best investment. I hesitated, then opened the voicemail. His voice came through urgent and strangled. Leah Cole wasn't authorized. Call me back. We need you. Behind him, I could hear frantic typing, pages flipping, someone speaking quickly like they were reporting a crisis. Ellis never sounded panicked. Even during surprise FDA inspections, he kept his calm. But now each word seemed ripped from his chest. I stayed silent. Jonah glanced over, question in his eyes, but he did not force me to answer. I turned the screen off. If I called back, I would be stepping back into the cage Cole had slammed shut. I had been pushed out, and maybe that was the only chance to see the truth I had been avoiding. Instead of trying to sleep that night, I opened my laptop. I plugged in an external hard drive and started backing up every audit trail file, every CAPA, every deviation log I had recorded. This system was my blood and sweat and tears across the years. I knew how it ran, where shortcuts were blocked, and every protection I had built. I dragged folder after folder, gigabyte after gigabyte onto the drive. The screen flashed, copying 16,432 items. I sat still listening to the computer fan hum like my own heartbeat. I understood clearly. After Cole canceled the training, no one at the company knew how to use the hidden layers in the system. The internal manuals I wrote were never broadly released. Only I and a few old team members knew the full setup. Now if I walked away, the system would become a black box. Jonah set a hot cup of tea beside me. He didn't ask what I was doing. He already knew. I opened the last folder, entered 2 layers of passwords. Reports from partner hospitals filled the screen. Jonah leaned in to read. Here, he pointed. See this? Storage temperatures flagged repeatedly. I nodded. Valve 17, I guessed. Jonah frowned. If they keep shipping, the risk is huge. You know that. I bit my lip. I had noted that leak in the notebook. I knew it hadn't been fixed properly. Now the hospital data confirmed it. Storage equipment was out of spec and vaccines were at risk before they reached patients. The phone buzzed again. Ellis, this time a second voicemail. I pressed play. The sterilizers won't validate and hospitals air threatening to cancel. Cole locked us out of your system. Please before Monday. His voice rushed breathless like someone running upstairs. In the background, doors were slamming, metal clanged, and staff shouted. Ellis was not the calm CEO I once knew. He sounded like a father about to lose a child clinging to any lifeline. I sat motionless, my hand gripping the external drive. Jonah touched my shoulder. You don't have to answer now, he said. I nodded. He was right. The question was not how much they needed me, but what I needed to do to avoid being swallowed again. The next day, I returned to the company building not to work, but to clear out. I walked familiar corridors, hearing the interlock clack behind me, the cold airflow from the ventilation. Fluorescent lights cast reflections on the shiny floor, catching the shoes I wore. The antiseptic ethanol sting rose to my nose. Everything was painfully familiar, like returning to an old house after being kicked out. No one called my name. I opened my locker, took the lab coat that still smelled of disinfectant, and shoved it into my bag. I tucked the orange notebook under my arm like I was holding a piece of memory. Passing the freezer room, I paused. The beeper sounded steady and dull. I closed my eyes and remembered Ellis walking this hallway with me, talking about safety. Now he left, pleading voicemails, but I knew any return of mine now would hand Cole another chance to make me a scapegoat. I turned and did not look back. The clack of the door closed behind me. It felt like the end of a chapter. That night, I plugged the drive into Jonah's computer so he could check. He is an epidemiologist, sharp with anomalous data. He pointed to reports from 2 major hospitals. Storage temperature indices fluctuated and logs lacked dual checks. He frowned. If a batch of vaccine went out badly, it wouldn't just endanger patients. The company's reputation would collapse. I leaned back, my tea gone cold. It felt like a dark circus. Morning, I got a raise. Noon, I was fired. Evening, the CEO begged for help. Night, I found hospital data errors. I should have felt despair. Instead, a feeling rose. Half dread, half clarity, power. Only I held the key to the system. Only I knew how to decode each layer, each shortcut. No one, not even Cole, could operate it without my training. And Cole had cut that training himself. I opened the orange notebook and wrote one final line for the day. Ellis voicemail 2. Hospitals threatening to cancel. Evidence saved. I looked up at Jonah. He sat beside me, the yellow lamp catching the light in his eyes. He asked quietly, "What will you do?" I took a breath, my finger tapping the hard drive. "Not yet," I said. They chose to push me out. Now they have to taste that place. Jonah nodded. He did not smile or add anything. He simply took my hand and held tight. That night I slept late, but for the first time in months, I did not dream of being erased from the system. I dreamed of a new corridor, long and warm with no smell of ethanol. A corridor leading to another door where I held the key. I did not pick up. Ellis's calls kept coming all weekend like rain on a tin roof. I let each voicemail fall into the inbox without opening it. I knew what they said. Come back, save them. But what I needed was not to return and become Cole's shield. It needed the exit they had handed me when they erased my name in broad daylight. On Monday morning, I sat in a cafe in the Research Triangle, laptop open, the backup drive neat beside me, light from the window glinting on its silver case. Jonah sat across reading a medical report, glancing at me now and then. The smell of dark Arabica filled the air, but all I tasted was the bitter knot in my throat. "You are not going back," Jonah asked, calm but steady. I nodded. Not the way they wanted. Never that way. A shadow crossed the table. I looked up into Maradoto's eyes. She was the BioArma consultant known for calling out whole corporations at FDA panels. Today she wore a beige blazer, hair pulled back, her gaze cold and precise. "I heard you got cut from Whitford," she said, putting a folder down. "I know that hurts, but it might be a blessing." "What kind of blessing?" I asked. She tapped a pen on the folder, a steady knock that opened the thought in my head. "I am working with the Southeast Hospital Consortium. They want a supplier oversight system that does more than verify paperwork, one that can expose polished data. Word is you built the system that Whitford now cannot run. They need someone like you." I flipped pages, quality reports, temperature charts, curves too perfect to be true. There I said the standard deviation is about to be erased. And here the response windows were truncated. "Someone is prettifying the data." Mara half smiled. "Exactly. The consortium does not want prettier numbers. They want negative space." She said the gaps, and I think you are the only one who can design it. "If Laya joins," Jonah said, "she needs full control. No distortions like at Whitford." "That is what I propose," Mara, then leaned in and looked me straight in the eye as if daring me. "Will you start your own company? I will handle the setup. You bring the brain and the principles." I sat with the words beating in my chest, then nodded. A few days later, the paperwork was done. Colant Compliance LLC was born in a small apartment with a desk covered in sticky notes. Colant, a bond that will not break, a name to remind me that data and decisions must carry responsibility like an irreversible chemical reaction. Our first client was the Southeast Hospital Consortium. They sent gigabytes of messy supplier data. I parked in the living room with my laptop, walls plastered with notes, and wrote the first lines of code for negative space protocols. Unlike legacy systems that only confirm what is present, I built algorithms to track what disappears. Cut time windows, flattened temperature swings, the picture-perfect values that reality never produces. For 3 nights, I lived on cold coffee and the tap of keys. Jonah brought hospital reports and set them beside me. "Look," he said. "Vaccine lots tied to valve 17 show 4 to 5 degree swings, while Whitford's submitted data is unnervingly smooth." I ran the algorithms. The screen bloomed red with anomalies. Negative space showed up like blood on white cloth. I shivered. If those lots went to market, the fallout would be catastrophic. 1 week later, I presented a draft to the consortium board. Over 10 faces R-boxed on the screen, arms folded, waiting. I did not show polished charts. I displayed the red empty spaces here. I pointed at the screen. "This is what they do not want you to see. Data made pretty, and those gaps match hospital incident reports. That points to deliberate tampering." Silence filled the room. An older physician pulled down his glasses and stared. Another exhaled and nodded. "We suspected it for some time," he said. "Now, we have evidence." When the meeting ended, I leaned back, exhausted and strangely light. Colant Compliance had stood up on day 1. That night, after saving the latest update, my phone buzzed. Ellis, I did not answer. His voicemail played, voice shaking. "La, I know you are working with them. We will pay more. Just come back. Do not let this fall apart." I wrote one line in the orange notebook. Ellis called, refused. Boundaries must hold boundaries. I knew I could not be Whitford's bailout shadow. I had chosen another path. I turned off the light, sat in the dark with the machine fan ticking like a heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, I could inhale and let the breath out slowly. Not because I had won, but because I had escaped. 3 weeks after Colent Compliance signed with the Southeast Hospital Consortium, the news exploded. The FDA issued a Form 483, and Whitford Biologics stood out on the page like a black stain on white paper. I read the release on the screen, each line hammering against my temple. Failure to maintain validated sterilization processes, inadequate training documentation, alteration of batch records without justification. Each finding felt like a blade, cutting not just the company's reputation, but the false world Cole had built. That night, the phone buzzed again. I did not answer. The voicemail recorded itself. Ellis's voice came through, almost broken. Laya, it's falling apart. FDA is here. Inspectors are walking the halls. Cole doesn't know what he's doing. If you don't help us, we're finished. Chaos surged in the background. Chairs crashing, phones ringing, someone shouting, "Where's the deviation log?" Ellis's breath was short, the sound of a man stripped of control. I sat unmoved, closing the orange notebook. I did not add a single line. Cole, of course, fought back the only way an arrogant man knows how. He tried to smear me. The next morning, a Triangle Business Weekly piece called me the over-engineer who built a labyrinth nobody could use. Quotes were handed out like confetti, true or not. She obsessed over unnecessary details. Her systems slowed down innovation. I sat in the cafe and read it, and I let out a small laugh. They called me obsessed with detail. It was the details that saved lives. The so-called over-engineer stopped Valve 17 from turning into a biological bomb. Jonah leaned over, steam rising from his cappuccino. "You okay?" he asked. I folded the paper and set it down. "This wasn't a setback," I said. "It was an opportunity?" He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds familiar." "From Cole," I said, voice cold. He thought he gave me a gift. I will let the system I built show how that gift explodes. Cole did not stop at press attacks. He hired an outside consulting team. Credentialed names who had never worked in a clean room to produce a report that supposedly proved his redesigned system was safer. The report was long with sleek charts and perfect numbers. A former colleague sent me a copy. I laughed at the perfection. No error bars, no variants, a sterile painting of safety. Maradado, who had seen this play before, said bluntly, "Fake. They copy sample data and paste it across batches. They think they can fool the consortium." But Cole had another plan. He staged a meeting with hospital reps and presented that shiny report with the confidence of someone shameless. I later heard a recording from a consortium doctor. Cole walked in, gray suit crisp, smile polished, and announced confidently that their processes were not only compliant, but exemplary. A few nodded, not out of belief, but fatigue. Then the consortium representative cut him off. "We will cross-verify using the negative space protocols developed by Colent Compliance." The room froze. Cole's face tightened. "That won't be necessary," he stammered. On the contrary, the doctor said, "It's mandatory." The cross-check ran that very afternoon. I was not in the room, but the report reached me. When Cole's data ran through negative space, the screen went red. Gaps shimmered like blood through gauze. The consortium board sat stunned. No more polite nodding. The next day, I was asked to oversee part of the FDA inspection. I stood outside Clean Room 3. The place so familiar that the smell of ethanol reminded me of every long night. I watched through the glass wearing a visitor badge. Cole guided the inspectors down the sterilizer line, talking smoothly, hands moving like he conducted a universe. Then at that moment, a tiny bead fell from valve 17 and pinged on the floor. That small sound sliced through the chatter. All heads turned. Eyes went to Cole, then to the spreading droplet. An inspector bent and swabbed. The room felt lean. I watched from outside, my chest tightening. Years of warnings waved away with a flip of a hand. And now the truth leaked out in a single drop. Cole tried to laugh it off. "It's just condensation," he said, voice trembling. "Condensation does not fluoresce under UV," the inspector replied. They shone the ultraviolet light and the droplet glowed blue. The clean room fell silent, pierced only by the filter fans. That night, Ellis left another voicemail. "They saw it," he pleaded. The FDA wrote it down. "If you do not step in, Whitford is gone. My son is finished, please." In the background, doors slammed, someone sobbed, and something heavy hit the floor. My heart tightened, but my hand did not shake. I set the phone down and sat alone in the dark. Streetlights smeared gold across the window. I knew I had gone too far to return. Whitford might sink. Cole might fall, but I would not. A summer storm had just swept through Durham, leaving puddles on the sidewalk that mirrored the gray sky. I walked into Biotech Place, once a symbol of Whitford Biologics' boundless ambition. Now the lobby felt thick, silent, my heels echoing like a metronome marking the death of an era. The receptionist took my visitor badge and lowered her head. No forced smile, only caution, as if the building itself knew it stood on the edge of a cliff. I rode the elevator to the 7th floor, fluorescent lights flickering above, the smell of damp carpet in the air. The boardroom door stood open. Ellis Whitford sat alone at the head of the long table, nothing like the man who once clapped my shoulder and called me the best investment. His navy suit was rumpled, collar undone, hands trembling as he lifted a cold cup of coffee. In front of him sat a thick folder marked with a blood-red clip. FDA Form 483. When I entered, he rose, forcing a smile, lips quivering. Thank you for coming. I owe you more than any apology could hold. I pulled a chair and sat across from him, my voice even. I'm here to listen. You have 5 minutes, Ellis nodded, his hollow eyes locked on mine. FDA will be back in 3 weeks. They saw the leaking valve, the empty logs. It's all in their report. Without your system, we lose our license. I'm not begging for coal, Laya. I'm begging for hundreds of employees, for hospitals depending on us, for patients out there. His voice broke, but I did not. I looked at him and saw only the voids he had let his son fill with illusions. I will not come back, I said slowly, not to be erased again, not to shield mistakes. Ellis faltered. Then what can save us? I opened the orange notebook, drew 3 bullet points, and slid it across. Whitford continues production. Colent compliance oversees independently. Southeast Hospital Consortium holds ultimate oversight. He read aloud, startled. A 3-way partnership. I call it checks and balances, I said. Noon holds absolute power. No one erases another with a click. His eyes welled. And the conditions. I closed the notebook, voice hard as steel. Payment up front, no bargaining. Valve 17 replaced, challenge test public before FDA and consortium. And Cole, I paused, staring straight at him. Cole, eyes reassigned to the night shift. He trains under every module I set, logs correctly, and submits reports. No shortcuts, no privilege. Ellis's jaw tightened. You want to humiliate him. I want to teach him in the only language he understands, labor and evidence. You may be his father, I'm not. To me, Cole is an untrained employee who endangered an entire community. The room went silent. Rain lashed the windows like whips. Ellis braced himself on the table, eyes searching me as if staring into a pit. If I sign, it means admitting my son failed. No, I answered softly. It means you finally chose the public over the Whitford name. The following week, the trial with the new Valve 17 was scheduled. I stood with the FDA consortium and Colent representatives behind the thick glass of the observation room. Cole wore a white clean room suit, sweat soaking his back. He was assigned to log entries and run the first test. A small role, but one I intended to make heavy. When the inspector asked for an audit trail, I saw Cole's fingers dart across the keyboard too fast. The reflex of someone used to cheating. My eyes narrowed. Seconds later, the screen flashed a warning. Unauthorized timestamp modification detected. The room froze. The inspector snapped toward Cole, voice sharp as a blade. Mr. Whitford, explain this. Cole's face drained. I was just trying to correct correction. Without justification is falsification. The inspector cut him off. Ellis stood behind, rigid as stone. His eyes widened. His hand clawed the table edge. I watched the struggle on his face. Father against CEO, blood against law. The moment stretched forever. Cole's hands dropped. His shoulders sagged. No arrogance left. Only a boy caught playing with fire. Ellis collapsed into a chair and pulled a pen from his pocket. He signed the 3-way agreement waiting at Thedable. Ink spread like a verdict. From today, he rasped. Colent has full oversight, and Cole will start again from 0. I nodded and shut the orange notebook. Some bridges once burned stay ash, but from ash you can still build new rules if you dare to hold them. Ellis said nothing. He only lowered his head as tears slipped onto the scarlet folder. Whitford Biologics looked like a ship battered after a storm. The hallways, once lit bright with false cheer at morning staff meetings, now felt quieter than a lab at midnight. But inside that silence, I heard something else. The log printers are humming again. Night shift staff are exchanging clipped but precise words. And above all, the audit trail is running steady, untouched, and uncut. Cole started his night shifts the first week after Ellis signed the agreement. A strange figure in a clean room suit, back slightly bent, eyes darting whenever colleagues noticed he was no longer VP of operations, but only a trainee. At first, his presence was a private joke in the break rooms. Raised eyebrows and whispers, the boss's son stuck on night duty, but audit trails don't lie. And slowly each number turned whispers into weary looks. In the third week, I received Cole's first deviation report. Just a note on condensation forming on a high-pressure seal. I read it 3 times. No cover-up, no backdate, just the truth, clear and plain. I leaned back and let a quiet smile escape. Not for Cole, but for the system that was finally teaching the very man who once dismissed it. Jonah looked over his tea. He's really changing. I don't know, I said, but for the first time, Cole didn't choose silence. 2 months later, the FDA inspectors returned. The mood was heavy but steady, nothing like the panic before. I walked with them down the steel hallways, shoes striking the epoxy floor. Staff no longer avoided their eyes, but handed over logbooks calmly. Cole was there too. He passed an inspector a deviation report written in his own hand. His voice was but firm. I logged this myself. Minor seal leak. Reviewed next shift. The inspector nodded, marked a check. Just a single line, but it rang in my head like a bell. At the end of the corridor, a group of night shift workers glanced at Cole. No more smirks. One even patted his shoulder. Cole flinched, then nodded back. Not a nod of privilege, but of work done. As we left, one inspector murmured to me, "Significant improvement. If they keep this path, the license will hold." I only nodded, but inside a weight I had carried for months began to crack. The consortium soon issued its decision. In a virtual session, their faces looked less severe. They voted to restore Whitford's contract, but under strict terms. Every batch must pass through Colin's negative space protocols before release. Ellis didn't argue. He sat there, hair silver and slumping, and gave a slow nod. In that moment, I knew he had accepted that power no longer rested in a name, but in the new rules we had built. At the same time, another headline spread. Riverton Labs, the rival that once boasted about taking Whitford's contracts, was caught bribing state officials to skip inspections. The press swarmed, investors fled, their prized contracts dangled, some shifting to the company's coalant advised. I sipped me coffee and thought justice wears many shapes. Sometimes a red mark in an audit trail, sometimes an expose in the paper. The defining moment came on an autumn morning. The challenge test for the new Valve 17, the test that would decide not only Whitford's fate, but Cole's. The clean room was crowded. FDA inspectors, consortium reps, coolant staff. Mara Dato stood beside me, arms crossed, eyes locked on the young man, trembling at his station. Ellis sat in the back, tense as a drawn string. Cole wore his clean room suit, gloves tight, standing before the gleaming valve. He opened the logbook, drew a breath, and read. Stepone, inspect valve housing integrity. Step 2, initiate pressure hold for 5 minutes. His voice wavered, but skipped nothing. Each move is slow but precise. No rush, no bluff. Sweat traced his temple, but he didn't stop. The gauge held steady through the 5-minute mark. The inspector nodded. Cole pressed on. One mistake, only one could end it, but there was none. Each step is read, performed, and recorded. When it was done, Cole looked up. His eyes were drained, but for the first time I saw no arrogance, no fear, only resolve. He looked through the glass, his gaze fixed on me. I stepped forward, voice even. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to make sure no one gets hurt. The room stayed quiet. Mara exhaled. The inspector paused his pen. Ellis closed his eyes and let his shoulders fall. Cole swallowed, then nodded. No protest, no defiance, just a nod, admitting every other road had burned to ash. That evening, I walked the Whitford halls. The sound of keys typing, sterilizers running, and staff trading shift notes. The air was different from months ago. No mocking whispers, no slamming doors, focus, care. A new culture is taking root. Ellis found me. He looked exhausted, but his tone was steadier. Thank you, Laya. Without you, we would have ended. I met his eyes. I didn't do it for Whitford. I did it for the patients, for the hospitals. Remember that. He nodded. I will. And I won't let it fall back into ashes. I left the building under yellow sodium lights on the damp street. Coolant compliance was no longer a small startup. It had become a shield, a barrier no one could break. And only by standing apart had it given Whitford a chance to rise again. I end long days in the same spot, a narrow walkway running behind the industrial park, where sodium lights smear yellow over wet concrete and the steady beeps of freezers echo from afar. No one comes here but me. Here I can hear myself clearly than in any office. I lean on the metal railing, look through the fogged glass at the cold containers glowing blue under the lights. In that moment, I remember the rooftop lunch when the Slack message lit me phone. You are done. Consider it my gift. 38, head of quality systems and validation. That morning, I got a raise and Ellis called me the best investment. A few hours later, his son erased my name with a brutal message and called it a gift. At the time, it felt like the life I had built over 2 years was shattered like glass on the floor. I thought I had been knocked down for good. But standing here now, listening to the machines beat like hearts, I realized that message opened the way out. A gift wrapped in Cole's arrogance. But it turned out to be my ticket out of a rotten system. If I had not been fired, I would probably still be fixing deleted logs, being waved off in meetings and worn down by daily compromises to my ethics. I think of Ellis, the man torn between father and CEO who finally signed the truth on paper. He lost more than I did. Some reputation, some faith, and perhaps the image he had of his son. But I know that in that moment he did the right thing. I think of Cole, the man who once dismissed detail, who trusted the Whitford name, who waved a hand and said seal with tape. Now he does night shifts, writing logs under white lights, relearning from the floor lines. I don't know if he has truly changed at his core, but I saw him tremble through each step of the challenge test, not skipping or hiding. That is a start. Sometimes a start matters more than everything else. And me, I escaped. Not to run, but to rebuild the rules. Colent compliance has become a firewall nobody can cross. A mechanism forcing everyone to face data as it is. No more gaps to hide behind a backdate. No shortcuts for those who think speed beats safety. Standing here, I see something I may have known for a long time but never named. True power is not destruction. I could have let Whitford collapse completely, refused every call, let the FDA yank the license and hundreds lose jobs. That would not be power, only ashes. Real power is rebuilding a system that makes those who humiliated you live by clearer, fairer rules. Power is refusing the bargain that trades public safety for production speed or profit. I whispered to myself into the damp air to lock the thought in the night. True power isn't about destruction. It's about refusing the bargain to trade safety for speed. The sodium light flickers and paints a long stripe in the puddle like a fake horizon. I know tomorrow will bring meetings, debates, and red reports to read, but I will walk into them differently. Not the person who was erased, but I one who turned that eraser into the new rulebook. I may never forget the sting of being erased in a single brilliant moment. But I will not forget the moment I realized that from the ashes we do more than stand up. We rewrite how the game is played. And that is the true gift. When I tell this story, I sometimes wonder if I should have ended it that night behind the industrial park. Sodium lights dripping yellow on wet concrete, freezer beeps steady like a heartbeat, reminding me that life and responsibility never really pause. But then I realized this story isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who has been humiliated at work, erased from their own effort, forced to sit quietly while a room pretended they were invisible. Maybe you're listening from a small office in a loud city. Maybe you're listening in your kitchen, pots clanging, dinner half-cooked. Maybe you're listening while driving down a long highway, headlights trailing like an endless stream. Wherever you are, I know you carry at least one scar. A scar from a dismissive word, from an unfair decision from the moment. Your worth was stripped away. I want you to know I don't share this story to flaunt a win. I share it to remind you that sometimes failure, or what feels like failure, is the exit you couldn't see. That cruel Slack message, consider it my gift, was exactly that. A gift not the kind anyone wants, but the kind you need to escape a broken system. Maybe you've received a gift like that too. Not wrapped in paper, not tied with ribbon, but a slammed door. The point isn't the gift itself. It's what you decide to do with it. Hold it like a wound that won't stop bleeding, or turn it into the foundation for something stronger. I chose the second, not because I was braver than anyone else, only because I saw a truth. I can't control how others treat me, but I can control how I respond. In silence, in restraint, I found the greatest power. Don't mistake me. Power isn't payback. It isn't crushing those who hurt you. Real power is being able to destroy, but choosing not to. Being able to strike, but holding back. Rewriting the rules instead of chasing the ones handed to you. I didn't need to shout or leak stories or watch the company burn. I only needed to build a system where safety and integrity became mandatory, not optional. And when I did, the people who once dismissed me had no choice but to learn again. Not because I forced them, but because the new rules left them no other way to survive. There's something I want you to take from this. You don't need your own company to do the same. Start small with what you can control. Draw boundaries. Keep your standards. Don't trade what you know is right. No matter how loud the pressure gets, it may cost you a job, a relationship, a fleeting recognition. But in the long run, it is that steadiness that makes others return to you because truth cannot be replaced. I think of Cole, who once fired me like it was a game. The day he stood at valve 17, shaking but still reading every step of the challenge test, I knew he had changed. Not because I forgave him, but because the rules forced him to. That mattered more than revenge. Because if one man can change, a system can be reborn. I think of Ellis, the father who once shielded blindly, finally forced to sign a contract for independent oversight. Not because I won, but because he saw the price of denial was collapsed. That wasn't a personal victory. It was proof that sometimes to save the many, someone has to hold the line alone. If you're listening and you see yourself in this, I want to ask you something. Have you ever turned professional humiliation into new rules? Maybe you've never told it. Maybe you've dismissed it as a memory to forget, but write it down. Speak it. You might find your story is the escape route someone else is desperate to see. Tell me the city you're listening from. I read every comment and I want to see the map stretch wide from Durham to Dallas, New York to New Orleans, small towns and big cities so everyone knows they're not alone. So someone across the country feels the community listening, understanding, and walking beside them. And if this story touched you, I ask you to subscribe. Not for the number, but without it, the algorithm may skip you and you'll miss the next story. A story that might be the reminder you need on a bad day. I'll close here with the one line I learned for myself. A line simple enough to stop you in your tracks. Some gifts can't be returned, but you can choose how to spend them.